Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Shaylee Desai, account exec in the West Region sales team at Microsoft, and your co-host for the event today. We are so grateful to have such a fantastic turnout as we celebrate International Women's Day with this amazing community of Better Together.
And I'm Sherry Devlin, Director in Business Applications at Microsoft and your co-host for today's program. On behalf of Women at Microsoft, welcome to our third annual Better Together Women's Leadership Summit. Thank you for joining us today.
What a difference 1 year can make. Many of you were here with us last time when we hosted this event in December 2019 at our Sunnyvale campus. Little did we know that the world we knew would change in so many profound ways, changes that none of us could ever imagine. Yet, we figured out creative ways to live and redefine work, kids, school, travel, and shopping, all while being at home.
And as I reflect on 2020, while I was stretched in ways I didn't think were possible, there was personal growth and time with my family that I don't think would have happened in a normal year. So there was definitely some silver lining and not all was lost. However, through all these transitions, one statistic that saddens me most is that nearly 3 million women have left the US workforce this past year due to the pandemic. And frankly, that was one of the key drivers for this year's event theme, because Better Together is all about a community addressing challenges that we are better served talking about together.
Quoting one of my favorite authors, Dr. Brené Brown, we don't have to do all of it alone. We were never meant to. Takes on a whole new meaning today for all of us. Thank you for coming together with your collective resilience to save anything we can from 2020 and build something new to help our organizations, caregivers, and communities. Today, we're truly honored for these remarkable women leaders who have invested their time to pay it forward as they share their wisdom and stories over the next 90 minutes. We will begin the program with a thought-provoking keynote session and a fireside chat with two incredible leaders, followed by an executive panel in a discussion around caregiving as a strategic priority.
And we want today to look as close to our in-person events as possible, including ensuring the audience has a voice. So please share your thoughts in the chat and post your questions during the Q&A. We have a team monitoring the chat who will be helping get me your questions asked to our incredible lineup of speakers this afternoon.
So without further ado, I would like to introduce Katie Brown, Vice President of Enterprise Sales Team at West Region Microsoft. She also serves as a board member of PBWC of California and San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, and an exceptional role model for many of us here. Welcome, Katie, to get us started by introducing our keynote speaker, Hank Black.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Shaylee and Sherry, for that very kind introduction. And again, a huge thanks to all of you who chose to spend your time this afternoon with us. And it is so great to see the turnout that we have. It is hard to believe that we have been working remotely and at home for the past year. I think the anniversary, for at least for Microsoft, when we went home was literally this past Monday. So, but here we are, and it is great to be here. Look, I have the opportunity to introduce our first speaker. She is our keynote speaker. Her name is Hang Black. Hang is the VP of Revenue Enablement for Juniper Networks. She is also a global speaker on sales leadership, a passionate advocate for women in the workplace. Hang's first book, which I had an opportunity to read this past week, called Embrace Your Edge. It's a great book, a quick read, is all about how immigrant women without access can pave their own way to success. So today, Hang will be speaking about the unique obstacles that women and immigrants face on a daily basis, and the importance to embrace the competitive edge offered by the diversity of our own workforce. So this is how we'll roll. Hang's going to join me in a minute, and she will speak for about 15 minutes and tell and share her story. Following her presentation, she and I will engage in a bit of a fireside chat. I have a few questions for her, but as Sherry said, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have questions, Sherry will share those with us and ask either one of us. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Hang. So Hang, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, My name is Hang Black. I have the privilege of leading global revenue enablement at Juniper Networks. But more importantly, I am a Vietnamese immigrant and an unapologetically ambitious woman in high tech. I recently wrote Embrace Your Edge for women who have been unseen and minorities who've been unheard because the conversation around diversity has been incomplete without a discussion about access. Inclusion does not ensure equality. Without equal access, valuable talent will continue to be left out and left behind. Without access to resources, choice, or voice, the journey can be an unclear tangle of overwhelming obstacles. Let's talk about the Leaky Pipeline. McKinsey's 2020 study showed that progression from individual contributor to the C-suite increases for white men by almost 2x, 35 to 66%. But this comes at a cost of 1/3 of a drop-off for white women and men of color, and an even more alarming drop-off to only 1/6 of the original population for women of color, from 18 to 3%. So I'd like to ask you, do we really believe the shape of these pipelines are a direct correlation to a lack of ambition or capability in women and people of color? Why does this happen? Because the formulas for success out there won't work for these populations because they weren't written for them by people who represent their human experience. If you think beginning your career at the base of a mountain, it's wide, there are many routes up. But as you ascend, have you noticed some people have a jet to the top? Some people have a helicopter to the top. Some people are equipped with Sherpas and tools that you didn't even know existed. Depending on how much access you lack, you may not even realize that you're navigating in the dark. Because how do you know that you're blind if you can't see? What you really need is someone to show you the secret door, give you the secret code to the secret tunnel. But the good news is, for those who have been really scrappy, they've clumsily honed their ability to find their way in the dark. Crisis is my jam, and it's my competitive edge. Because when the lights turn off, leaving many disoriented, the scrappy ones are already prepared. And when full visibility returns, they're even more agile and they're more resourceful to ascend quickly. The even better news, the great news, is just because you weren't born with access doesn't mean you can't curate and create your own. So let's talk about how you can embrace your edge to rise beyond the status quo, to embrace your unique identity and to become your own Shiro. Now, my family left on April 29, 1975, one day before Saigon fell. My parents were in their late 40s when they left everything behind: life, language, culture, and country, for the possibility, not probability, of a better life. On land, this meant riding around for hours with two of my father's subordinates in the car the size of a VW Bug. If you're counting, that's 14 people in the car the size of a VW Bug. In the rocky ocean, this meant handing me, the baby, to a giant stranger on one boat to throw me to another stranger on another boat who caught me with one chubby little hand. We were then sponsored by a Lithuanian family who themselves were immigrants and eventually found our way to Louisiana. And even as a product of one of the poorest public school systems in the country, I found my own access, focused on my studies, with a fierce determination to succeed, and eventually graduated with a chemical engineering degree from the University of Texas. As an outsider for the better part of my childhood, smack in the middle in the conflict between race, religion, Eastern and Western values, I was a misfit. I was never explicitly excluded nor implicitly included among my Black and white peers. Let me tell you, as an outsider, invisibility is an unwanted superpower. But inside the outsider's lens, I embrace what would become a lifelong skill of impartial observation. So you might ask, how did an engineer end up in sales? Well, the journey has been nonlinear, as you'll probably hear with many of the women who are coming to the panel later. I like to say that I started in engineering because I like numbers and I like solving hard problems, but I went into sales because I like numbers with dollar signs in front of them a lot better. The passing of my father gave me the courage to move to California to advance my career in marketing. And the passing of my mother gave me the ultimate courage to leave corporate altogether and start consulting, where I earned the nickname Black Ops. And there I really gravitated towards sales enablement, where I honed my expertise in that field and received referral after referral to run larger teams until I ended up at Juniper. But the road hasn't always been easy. There are many ways to tell someone to sit down and shut up. And I'm pretty sure I've heard most versions of most reasons, and I'm sure you have too. But when I haven't succeeded, it's because I tempered my voice. I became inauthentic, less creative, less productive, and my performance suffered, initiating a downward spiral where careers go to die. But how does that happen? Let me ask you, what is your definition of a minority? Is it race? Is it gender? Is it religion? Is it tenure? Being in a minority simply means you are part of the smaller group that's different. Full stop. The smaller the group, the smaller the voice. The fact is, it's lonely to be the only. In a bowl of yellow Skittles, a blue one stands out. Now that's great for branding, but terrible for belonging. Imagine in a bowl of multicolored, multi-shaped, multi-type candy, you are free to enjoy the deliciousness of each one. In a room of misfits, everyone's the same. Each person is more free to express their voice. Each can be seen for who they are and what they bring to the table as an individual, instead of being lumped into a group of us versus them. Our differences and our flaws are what makes us collectively complete. So I challenge individuals to accept their unique edge, and I challenge organizations to embrace the different perspectives of these scrappy professionals. Because if we can truly listen with open eyes and open ears, we can respond with open hearts and open minds. And guess what? We'll be able to receive the same. So let me ask you, when you start a journey, how do you pick your destination and how do you plan your route? Do you print it out on a paper map and stay on the same path no matter what? Or do you follow a route that someone else has written for you on a map they've drawn for you? For me, I followed the story until I didn't. Why? Because there's nothing that accelerates self-growth faster than recovering from pain. Over 7 years, I experienced the deaths of both of my parents. I was laid off 3 times, never for performance, always for reorganization, picked up within 24 hours within the same company, and all after I had children. And because I believed in meritocracy, it had always worked. I worked harder and harder until I landed myself into the emergency room twice. But with each sad disruption, I became more grounded in my purpose. I shed the comfort of a status quo that was no longer serving me, and my recovery accelerated. With each painful event, I was quicker to distinguish possibilities for happiness from the probability of paralysis in unhappiness. Each time, I became less fearful about surrendering to the suck to face the decisions that were necessary for growth. A story about women in the workplace would be incomplete with an open discussion about perfectionism and self-care or lack thereof, and that's what I hope we get to talk about today. As a woman, there's a very real struggle that exists between home and career. As an immigrant, there's a very real struggle that exists between honoring our culture and seeking our fulfillment. Because for immigrants, sustainability is seen as the destination, and fulfillment is seen only as luxury. So let me tell you, when people ask me, how do you succeed? I tell them, don't do this. Don't wait for parental loss. Don't wait for layoffs. Don't wait for ER visits. Don't wait for a divorce and 6 moves in 7 years. Because you know what? We have to blow up the myth that you can have it all. You cannot have it all, and you cannot have it all at the same time, and you cannot do it alone. That is a privilege. Not everyone and everything can be a priority. So through my trials, I have learned to unapologetically respect myself by honoring my needs. Healing begins with accepting ourselves and each other, not despite our broken wings, but because of them. Don't shift your mindset because as if your life depends on it. Shift your mindset because your life actually does depend on it. So I invite you today to embark on a journey of discovery and transformation. Reflect, get oriented. If you could wave a magic wand, what would your world look like? Recalibrate. Are your expectations aligned to what the situation calls for, or are you on an outdated trajectory? Reset. I know it's disorienting. It's so uncomfortable, but it's the difference between dreaming or doing, between talking or acting. So decide on your destiny. Start from where you are. Grab a pen, reflect, outline, write, and leave room for the unexpected so that discoveries along the way can drive your authentic course of action. Because diligence and intelligence has always worked, you expend tremendous energy climbing with bare hands when all you really need are grappling hooks. People in power can look at you as a doer without having the lens to see you as a leader. They can listen, but without having the ability to hear you pass inherent judgments. So address those biases, build credibility. It's hard to earn, easy to lose, and harder still to recover, if ever. But it is earned with trust and competence. So 3 tips for you. Define your values. Understand your strengths and excel in your capability. Get really damn good at what you do and find your superpower. What do you want to be known as a human, a professional, and a leader? But the journey doesn't end when you get an invitation to the room. Representation does not ensure a voice at the table. What's your role? Be clear or get clear. Are you serving? Are you sitting? Or are you speaking? Me, I'm standing. So I'll leave you with a clear path. To get there, better, not bitter. C for clear. C for clarity. Be clear or get clear. L for learn. Earn it, own it, evolve it, become relentlessly relevant in your area of expertise, as well as from your own experience. E, embrace your edge, the qualities derived from your experience and the tenacity that has been shaped by adversity, the grit that comes from pain, the resourcefulness that comes from lack of access, and the gratitude that comes from scarcity. A, for access, curate your own community. You don't have to be born with one to form one. R, for responsibility, take accountability. Once you get to each vista, pave the path for those behind you. It's time for immigrant women to step into their courage, to be vulnerable enough to embrace their whole true selves. It's time for organizations to celebrate women, in minorities, and immigrants for their talent, drive, and refreshing perspective. And once you get there, throw all those ropes down and pull all the chairs to the table, because everything you've already accomplished is a mountain someone else is currently trying to climb. Maybe you can give them a leg up. Thank you.
Thank you, Heng. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you sharing your story. It's just so inspiring and impactful, and just love listening to how you thrive during, my gosh, starting as a little baby and then during the chaos and as you like to say in your book, navigating in the dark. I would just love to, just have kind of an open and frank conversation about a little bit more about your journey and then how you're applying it, some of the lessons to your own sales organization at Juniper today. I think there's so much we can all learn from what you've said, whether you're a minority or an immigrant or, I think there's just so many great lessons there. So can you share a little bit about how you apply some of this at work at Juniper?
Absolutely. When people ask me, how often do I use my 3 R's? How often do I reflect, recalibrate, and reset? And I tell them every day. We really need to meet our customers and our partners where they are. And that really means thinking outside of the box. Well, you can't really do that unless you challenge your own biases and think about, what your perspective is and how you can put yourself in the shoes of your customers. And that's why I think it's so important to have cognitive diversity, not just gender and racial diversity, but cognitive diversity, so we can bring all of those perspectives and think about. I read about a sales leader who puts a small chair on his desk because he always reminds himself, what if my customer was in the room? So, those are the couple things that we do. We ensure that we're collaborating, that we're always inviting diversity, and that we're always challenging ourselves to, reflect, recalibrate, reset.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I also love the acronym that you shared at the end, CLEAR. In fact, I wrote it down: clarity, learn, edge, access, and responsibility. And I think provides a great roadmap, for all of us. I'd love to kind of shift the conversation a little bit. And I know we're going to be getting into a lot more of this in the next panel, but it's so interesting to me about what we're all experiencing as women around caregiving and how companies are showing up maybe in different ways to support women. And I think when we talk about caregiving, we have to think about it in its broadest sense. I think in the past, we've always thought of caregiving as, small children, right? But I think what the pandemic has shown us is that in one way or another, we all end up being caregivers. I think about my own situation. My girls are older, so it didn't affect me initially, until my mom broke her hip. And, and she needed surgery and she needed help, and she came and lived with us. And I found myself, I had to be a caregiver, for her. So it's just impacting us in all just very different ways. And so we'd just love to learn a little bit more about maybe how Juniper and the Juniper leadership team is addressing employee caregiving, again, in this broad sense, as a strategic, priority. And because I think things are changed, going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. I was a remote worker for nearly a decade, and
wow, very different than me, but that's
yeah, and
right.
and with each of my kids, I only took 6 weeks off, and already at 4 weeks, I was itching to come back to work because I'm that person, unapologetically, ambitious and workaholic. I just love working a lot. I guess it's a little bit sad, but and I remember people saying, "Well, remote workers, they aren't as efficient." And as you saw in the book, Katie, I was like, I hate to be the person to say I told you so, but I told you so.
Yeah.
People who work from home, you're getting a very, very impersonal window into their personal lives. So we're seeing that everyone, they can still be productive. In fact, people who work from home tend to overwork. That is a symptom. So with Juniper, we are definitely giving global holidays each quarter, which is, everyone is off, no emails. My team specifically, I tell them to stay off their cell phones for anything work related. So that means if someone is on PTO, if their Teams is shut down, you only get to text someone if it's they want to share a personal joke or whatever. But right now, cell phones are completely, for my team anyway, completely off limits unless it's just a personal engagement. It tells people when and where you're available for work. One of the other things that I do is I schedule 25-minute meetings instead of 30 and 50-minute meetings instead of 60. I block out my team's calendar every other Friday for GSD Friday, either get stuff done or get sleep done, but I know you need to get rested. But those are kind of the things that we're doing with self-care. People who live in the Bay Area also get access to personal trainers remotely. So I don't know about you, Katie, but the busier I am, the more I spend time working out just to make sure that I'm getting those endorphins and some self-care scheduled in.
Yeah. No, I love all of that. And it's just you're such a great role model for the rest of the folks in your organization as well. But you're exactly right. I mean, people are working, they say, I think upwards of 25% more.
Yeah.
We no longer know when the beginning and the end of the days are. It's just one big long day. And so it's it can be quite challenging. So I really appreciate you sharing that. That's great. Would love to, we're doing a lot of work at Microsoft around putting empathy into action. It's actually being led by our president of MSUS, Kate Johnson, and it's super powerful. And would just love to learn a little bit more from you as a sales leader at Juniper. How are you putting empathy into action? And so, because it can be challenging, right? Like myself and you being responsible for revenue goals, you have to manage the expectations of a company and their goals, right? While balancing the employee, the well-being of your employees, which is never more important than right now while we're all working remotely, from home. So just if you have any thoughts there to share, that would be great.
Well, we definitely focus on authenticity. When the pandemic first hit, it was kind of cute to kind of have to have more meetings to try to check in with your team. It was kind of cute to have happy hours, every other week or whatever. But then it started becoming a chore. So what we really started doing is saying, asking them, same thing with when we're advocating for diversity programs, ask the people for whom you're advocating for. If I do this, will you attend? Will it actually be beneficial for you? Or is it going to be yet another thing you have to do when what you really need is more time to go get stuff done or to cook for your kids or whatever? So we kind of check in individually with, what people need and cater to that versus kind of coming in as big brother, big sister and saying, I know what you need to be healthy, So it's about giving people the white space that they need to take care of their own mental health.
Yeah, that's so true. I know we were saying that as well as a leadership team is like, I think people are a little tired of the virtual happy hours. In fact, I think people are looking for other ways to figure out, how to connect because it is important. It's super important to figure out how to stay connected to folks. So I'm hoping there's some questions from our audience, but I did want to do a quick little lightning round and through the COVID lens, just to people know you a little bit better. But so I'm going to ask you some quick questions, and you can just tell me which one is relates to you. So I think this next one's easy. But if you Netflix or Apple TV?
Oh, Netflix.
I was going to say, Apple what? No, I'm kidding.
No, I love Apple TV, but right now there's just a lot of content on Netflix.
I know. There's a great show. One show I watched on Apple TV. I think it was called The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston.
Oh,
Love that.
Oh, yeah.
So Peloton, which I just got 2 days ago, loving it, or to run outside?
Outside for sure.
Oh, that's something else in common. We're going to figure this Peloton out. Okay, when it comes to masks, are you a fashionable cloth one or or paper?
Plain black cloth.
Plain, wow, okay. Eating, when it comes to getting food, DoorDash or Grubhub?
DoorDash.
There's also
I don't
Uber
really use
Eats and
either.
Caviar.
I cook all the time.
I know. And then last but certainly not least, ebook or hardcover?
Oh, hardcover for sure. If I can get
me
my hands on it.
There's nothing nicer than holding that book, especially before
There's
bed.
something gratifying about flipping the pages, right?
Physically turning the page, right? I know.
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Sherry, do we have any other questions from the audience? Like we said, we want this to be interactive. We want to see what's top of mind for you. And, but any questions for Hang or even myself?
Yes, absolutely. Lots of questions coming in.
Great.
So actually, this first one will be for both of you, though. So can you both please share some ideas on how we can be visible and find more opportunities, live our passion and purpose, all while being remote?
Katie, do you want to go or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
So one of the things that, I always love to look at the gifts of adversity. If you think about what has happened with COVID, look at the real estate on your screen right now. Katie and I have the exact same real estate. When you're in a meeting full of men, guess what? You have the exact same real estate. You have the exact same voice. So I tell women all the time, if you want to be seen, show up, turn your cameras on. If you want to be heard, speak up. This is your opportunity. The pandemic has completely democratized our ability to share voice and share our opinions.
Yeah, no, I, completely agree. And I think it's hard to figure out, how to stand out and how to differentiate yourself while working remotely. I think we're so accustomed to, seeing people in the office and, getting recognition that way. And so, but I think there's lots of ways to do it. I think, if you think about a strategic project that you're working on, it's really the same way you would do it if you were in the office. You want to reach out, you want to network, you want to have those coffees, with folks. And so it does take a little bit more effort. But I think one of the things that you said that is so true is everyone is in the same situation. It's not as if some people are in the office and some people are at home. And so I think that's what you mean. It's sort of that great equalizer, which is really, really true. It's part of the reason why it's working right now is because everybody's working remotely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you also have the opportunity to engage in conversation. You'll love this, Katie, through collab tools like Teams, where again,
I do love that.
You've got democratic access to the people who have influence, right? And my boss Marcus just interviewed me for International Women's Day, and he said same thing. He loves being on Teams because anyone can get to him. It's not just the executives who are crossing by in front of his door. And if you think about, how many of us are triple booked most of the time, but we can actually be in a meeting and see the chat streams from other meetings that we're invited to. So there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate and show up.
Yeah, no, so true. Anything else, Sherry?
Yeah, a couple more. I think we've got time for probably 2 more questions. This one will go to Heng from the audience. Your journey is amazing. It's an inspiration as to how you found your voice and reshaped your career from engineering to sales. I would love to know what motivates you to seek out not only inclusion, but access.
What motivates me? It's quite simple. I don't want anyone to go into the ER room. It sounds trite, but the road for me was way more difficult than necessary for not only any woman, but any person. And I chose the term immigrant because, this story, it works for women. It works for men, for immigrant men. It works for anybody who doesn't have access. So what I really wanted to do was put in 30 years of reading books, going to conferences, going to therapists, the last few years of a lot of executive coaching. How do I package that up and gift it back to other people who may never have access to these lessons? And they don't have access to these executive coaches who can teach them about transactional analysis, how to pull conversations back to an adult model, how to gain influence, how to build your network. How do I patch that up and share it with everyone so that no one else is left behind? First of all, it's the right thing to do. And secondly, it makes business sense.
Love that. Thank you, Heng. And this last question, I think the audience would love actually to hear from both of you, Katie and Heng. How do you identify your calling? Do you use the word calling to describe your work, an aspect of your work? If not, how do you think about your work instead? So basically, I think the thinking of work is what I do, not who I am, but sometimes that's a very blurry, a blurry line.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually a great question. It's super insightful. I was just sitting here thinking about it, I think about a little bit of kind of what inspires you, sort of who are you, what inspires you. And sort of when you are working from home and working remotely, those lines absolutely get blurred. And I think for me, a lot of it, I think really began, and there was a pretty big pivot in my career when I really figured out what was most important to me, and I really became my true authentic self and led from that place, as well as sort of grounded myself on my values and what is most important. And that kind of becomes your roadmap, and so I don't know if you can really separate the two, because if you're really living your true authentic self, you live it at work and you live it, at home. And so I think that's once you get grounded in what inspires you, your authentic self, your values, what's important, it really helps guide you, in your work as well.
So I get this question so many times a day that I can tell you directly, pages 131 to 134.
That's great.
Essentially, it's what you said, Katie. It's making sure you know your identity and your purpose. There's a tool called StrengthsFinder that I really love. I've used it for nearly a decade. But also, if you've ever had the chance, I would listen to Carla Harris. She's got a TED Talk out there that talks about what adjectives describe you. And what I do is I give people, when I run a workshop, I give people a list of 30 values and I ask them to narrow it down to 10. Then I ask them to take those 10 values and I ask them to narrow it down to 5. And then I say, okay, go look at your company values or the role that you're aspiring to sit in. What 3 matches both your personal values as well as your professional desire? And if you think about it, it really does come down to happiness. And again, I don't want to be trite about it, but when you wake up in the morning, are you jazzed to go to work? Are you jazzed to live your day? Because I would argue that if you're not living for your own happiness, you're not being the best, kindest person to yourself, which limits you from being the best person, professional, for everyone around you.
Love it. That is so great. And I think a great place for us to end this great conversation. So again, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your inspiring story. Learned so much from you today. So, and I would encourage everybody to get the book and continue the conversation. Anyway, so I am going to have the pleasure of introducing our panel and our next section. So next on the agenda, we'll have our executive panel. It is going to be a discussion that will be moderated by Heather Ainsworth. And Heather is the CEO of Workable Concept, which is featuring a cross-disciplinary group of leaders representing finance and HR and marketing, sales, operations from VMware, Microsoft, Genesys, and Confluent. The panel discussion that Heather will be leading will address topics ranging from how leaders are putting empathy into action, caregiving in its broadest sense, and a strategic priority to the impact COVID is making on business planning as it relates to employee productivity. Our panel is full of women leaders who are excited to really dive into this conversation with all of you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Heather. Heather?
So sorry about that. Hi, Katie and Hang, thank you guys so much for that. That was a wonderful discussion on leading with empathy in action. And I loved hearing your fresh take on how diversity and inclusion priorities really play a crucial role, not just in being kind of a great place to work, but also a workplace where we build businesses that thrive. And we're going to build on that now in this with a vibrant discussion with some fabulous panelists about what it really looks like to put empathy into action across key functions of a business in pursuit of financial and workplace goals, particularly those around retaining and developing employees when they're in phases of caregiving for kids or adults or both. So first, let's start with some intros. I was hoping that as way of introduction, you could tell us what your role is in your organization, and just like a quick one-sentence example of when your organization has really put empathy into action. Amy, can you lead us off?
Sure. And apologies for the sun. I'm here in the Seattle area, so it comes out ever so infrequently. So it's hard for me to close the blinds. I don't even think we have blinds in this room. So hopefully I'll stay in camera and you not in too many shadows. But thanks for the intro, Heather. My name's Amy Coleman. I'm a corporate vice president in HR at Microsoft. I lead a portfolio business that really covers legal, finance, HR, and employee relations and various other functions. And I'm a mom of 4 teenagers. So it's definitely been a crazy life this last year, if not this last decade. So thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself.
Okay, thanks. Joyce, how about you?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Joyce Kim. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Genesis. Like Amy, I'm also a mom, but mine are 9-year-old twin boys. So it's been an amazing experience to be home with them. I think you asked sort of the organizational empathy in action. And one of the things that it dawned on me thinking about it is like, we've really gotten a little bit more personal with the team to understand sort of their unique circumstances. So whether it's a kid or elderly parents or extended family or neighbors even, just sort of trying to understand everyone's individual thing to the extent that they're comfortable sharing has been a good thing, I think, for the company and the team.
I love hearing that. That's such a great example. We'll loop back to that. Thanks for sharing that, Joyce. Erica.
Hi there. Hi, Heather. Hopefully you can hear me. I look a little frozen on the screen. But I'm president of field operations at Confluent. We are a data infrastructure company pioneering a new category of event streaming. We're a close partner with Microsoft, so glad to be here today. And I lead the field operations organization, which is all of our customer-facing teams. And so interestingly, one of the ways that we put empathy into practice at the beginning of the pandemic was really thinking about our customers and how could we best meet them with changing priorities and moments of need. And so so that was a great opportunity for us. And then, of course, also thinking about our employees. But I love to think about how empathy extends beyond the company walls out to partners and customers as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Paula, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you, Heather, and hello to everybody. So I'm Paula Delaney. I'm a Senior Vice President of Finance at VMware. My responsibility is with my team covering all of the finance support to the customer operations organization. This past year, I think, has been eye-opening for everybody, as we'll get into the discussion, no doubt. One area I think that's been important at VMware has really been giving people the permission to take time off and letting them know it's okay. And even though they didn't have anywhere to go, it's just a case of close the laptop, put down the phone, whatever it might be, but just allowing people to take that time and really, take a break and get some headspace, because it's been challenging on so many different levels. So that's something that I think VMware has done a fantastic job of this past year.
I love that. Such great examples from everybody. And thank you again. I know all of you are so busy. We so appreciate you taking time to join us today. So diving in, I think it's really important that all of us here gathered today understand just a little bit of the research. Research shows that employers that are empathetic actually have higher team and financial performance, like dollars and cents. This is truly a business strategy. The top 10 companies in the Global Empathy Index increased in value more than twice as much as the bottom 10, and they generated 50% more earnings. Like, imagine sitting down with your P&L to be like, hey, how do we boost our earnings 50%? And someone says, oh, we're going to be more empathetic. It sounds like a conversation that might not happen in some of the senior leadership teams I've been on, and yet we know that that's the conversation we need to have. In fact, 91% of CEOs think empathy actually is tied directly to financial performance. So to you, incredible set of senior leaders in your own organizations, could you each just share with us briefly, how do you try to build empathy into how you run your own team? And can you highlight, are there things you're doing that's like your leadership style with your team? Or are there ways that your own organization has built empathy into the business processes and infrastructure of how the organization runs? So if your team member went and worked for someone else, it would still be there. Let's see, Erica, do you think you can kick us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First off, I'll start with one of Confluent's company values, which is around being smart, humble, and empathetic. That was, one of the first values that was formed at the company. And that's great because it really sets a tone from the moment that we're interviewing new employees and welcoming them into the company. So it's kind of embedded in our culture. And when I think about how do we really operationalize this concept of empathy, I think about practices programs, and policies. And I think all of them are important. And I know we'll dive into each of those areas throughout the panel. But in short, I think of practices, things like meeting culture and things like, making sure that people do take that time off, modeling that ourselves as leaders. I think about programs like manager training, or we as a young company just launched employee resource groups for the first time this year. So that really went a long way toward building empathy. And then on the policy front, we were able to do things like extend parental leave and extend, employee assistance programs to address mental health issues that we know are on the rise due to the pandemic. So I think about practices across all of those areas and how important it is, as you say, to really operationalize those into our working rhythm.
Sounds great. Joyce, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how empathy has become such a big thing for most companies, naturally, I think, in the last year. But Genesis actually has quite a history of engaging customers in an empathetic way, just because we're in the more contact center and dealing with customers all the time from a technology perspective. But we took that and really espoused the notion of empathetic experiences throughout the company. The one thing that I found really interesting is the interpretation of what empathy means. So you can put that word and, to our customers, it's all about, efficiency, effectiveness, and empathetic experiences. What does that mean to the employees? And I think we found that there was a lot of misconception about, okay, empathy doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations or that you don't make difficult decisions. It's about how you execute on that with respect, with understanding, with transparency, and giving as much flexibility as possible. But it's more of the how. And I think that was one of the ways that I'm trying to work with my team to say, just because we're doing something that you disagree with or that it's hard, that doesn't mean that we're not demonstrating empathy. So that's one of the things we're working on.
That is a really powerful point, and I hope we can come back to it too. It's just, I'm going to be thinking about that one for days as I move it through my own work. Thanks so much. Paula, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, so at VMware, we're doing a lot of the similar programs that Erica mentioned and Hang spoke about earlier. I think particular focus and emphasis on the mental health side of it and what coaching might be made available for the team members or their families as needed. I think as well, for me as a leader, what I try to do is just have a lot more listening sessions. I mean, it was a little bit embarrassing that a pandemic needed to happen before I did more outreach with my teams. I was probably more focused on who I saw every day as opposed to who I could reach in a virtual way. So really trying to have more breadth across the team and having those listening sessions and just understanding where people were at in their day, what was happening. I think getting a lot of intel from that, and then we could use and bring up to other parts of the organization. That gave us a lot of insights and helped us naturally become a bit more empathetic.
Absolutely. I think the role modeling of empathy starts with listening that comes from a senior leader like you must be so powerful in your team. Thanks so much. Amy, what's happening at Microsoft on your team in this perspective?
Thanks for the question, and great, so much in common with the other women here on the panel. What's been interesting is I know many of us have waited for a long time for empathy to become part of the corporate conversation, and nurturing a culture of empathy has become one of the top HR trends of 2021. This is along with, flexibility, D&I, digital transformation, and Heather, like you said, if it becomes a business imperative, it becomes more of the conversation that's less about HR, someone like me coming in and telling people about empathy, but more about it becoming just part of how we stay connected. It's a good question about where do we build it into our processes. I think about the journey of our cultural evolution when we were really trying to become more customer obsessed, and it really turned into, and Hang talked about it earlier, is really customer empathy. How do I put myself into the shoes of the customer so I can become customer obsessed? Mm-hmm. And through that journey of cultural change, I think we're seeing it show up in so many of our processes now, not just in the customer, not just in the one-on-one relationship with managers and employees, but we're seeing it in frameworks that we're training managers on, including model coach and care and things that have been really critical to us building empathy as really part of who we are.
I love that. Those examples are so great. I'm hoping those who are listening are kind of jotting down the ideas you can bring into your own team or back to your own C-suite to see if you guys can experiment and play with them. I'm a huge proponent of little experiments to find wins and build on them. And so hopefully, as you're listening today, just gather in not only what those experiments are, but who's trying them, who's got that out there, and you can reach out to all of us afterwards to gather more insights into what you're hearing about. But for now, I want to really focus us in. Sherry did such a beautiful job of framing kind of some of the motivation for why they chose this year's focus for the Better Together event. And this issue of empathy has really come to the fore during the pandemic when it comes to employees who are in a caregiving phase of their career. Maybe they're parents, maybe they're caring for an adult loved one. Frankly, during the pandemic, we see people caring for their roommates or their neighbors. Caring is a universal experience for employees. So just for a moment, take a sec and just type into chat, everybody, what percent of the employees in your organization do you think today have some level of caregiving responsibility for a child or for an adult loved one? Just a guess. Sherry, can you tell us generally kind of what we're seeing? Can you? And if not, that's okay. But I'll tell you, it's likely to be 73%. This is out of the Harvard Business School's Caring Company research project. So when we think as business leaders, God, if I had 73% of my employees who I know cannot work at full capacity through the pandemic, which is still ongoing, even though we're vaccinating, if I have 73% of my employees who are working, say, at like 8 to 10% less productivity, what is the implications for how I run my business, for how I build a profitable business that doesn't also run caregivers off my team? Because we know that so many companies, almost everybody here, has done fabulous benefits and policies and all sorts of great stuff, but we still know the numbers are, astounding around the number of women leaving the workforce. So as senior leaders, what are the implications for how we can set our own goals, whether that's corporate or team or individual level? Could you each just I'd love it to be kind of conversational, just share with us, as you came into 2021, or maybe are still adjusting goals, how do you take this into account in a way that makes it sustainable for employees who are caregiving and still feels fair to employees who aren't? Let's see. I'm wondering, Amy, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. I thought a lot about, and it's almost too close right now, Heather, to think about what have we learned from this past year. Like you said, the pandemic is still underway. So, but we have, what a shame if we don't take all the things that we learned about this year and bring it into our learnings, into our organization. If I think about how we can really make this more durable for the long term, I'll start with how I and the company have really broadened our notion of caregiving. I think when we originally saw the pandemic and started responding, we responded, Heather, in a caregiving manner, which was, let's give a pandemic leave. So I'm very proud of the company and the agility and the speed in which we moved, but we really saw time away from work as the solution to the problem. And now looking back, we realized that most of, and especially women, wanted to stay at work. They just wanted to have more flexibility. And that means a million things to a million different people. So I think learning from those mistakes, and then how do we make this a more sort of durable structure through data sharing, through prioritization of work, through continuing the conversation. We all know that, an engaged employee gives more of their discretionary effort. So having managers understand how to have a conversation about engagement, including flexibility, including caregiving, will make an employee, sort of the employee satisfaction goes up and the discretionary effort goes up. So again, bringing it back to a business imperative, but really understanding what did we learn from how we tried to solve the problem, and then what do we want to bring back to our culture.
I love that. Yeah, and that process of learning and reflection is going to continue to happen, right? And Paula, as you flagged to us, there's a lot of listening that happens in that, and Joyce, a lot of hard decisions that need to be executed with empathy and respect, and an eye to equity and inclusion as well. Joyce or Erica or Paula, do either any of you guys want to build on what Amy shared with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I thought about the fact that I don't think the aggressiveness of the goals and the things that we wanted to do have changed, but what we did was to rethink how we achieve them. So instead of sort of going through the process, for example, in marketing, if we were going to put on an event or do a campaign, we'd normally have sort of the way that we would approach it and who would work on what. Given people's circumstances, we really had to say, okay, how do we get creative? Do we blend more international so that people have flexibility in when they do things? And, one of the other things that came out was we found a bunch of people were like, hey, I've always wanted to try that. I think it gave them an opportunity to sort of lean in somewhere that they wouldn't normally have done. So, I mean, we've talked about free time and sort of, we all saw the phenomenon that, and I even did it. Like, why would I take vacation? I'm not going anywhere. It's like, I'm not going to waste my hours on that, but it's really important, right? So you do like a group thing where you say, okay, half day here, we're all going to take that time off. So we've gotten really creative at being, adapting to the moment, but I do think that communication has been the number one thing. And I told my team, probably about 6 months ago, we are used to communicating within our team, but you guys have to get good at communicating outside, setting the right expectations so that your partner organizations, your other groups within the company know what, sort of situation you're working through. And that's been like a shift.
Got it. Super powerful. That's great.
I think those are some great ideas, and I would add on that both what Joyce and Amy articulated really resonates with me. I think at Confluent we thought a lot about, okay, how can we best equip our managers to know how to lead kind of in this culture? Because let's be honest, sometimes for a frontline manager, it was important that we let them know it's okay to give your team permission to have more flexible working hours, or it was okay to sort of take that feedback in. We started to offer, even though we have kind of an unlimited vacation policy, we started to offer recharge days, several extra days per quarter. And the response was unbelievable. We kind of thought, well, wait, people can take, vacation when they need to anyway. But when we did it in a way where we said, okay, the entire America's sales team is taking a recharge day, this, first Monday or second Friday of this month, it was really powerful because everyone had permission to disappear. No one was going to bug them because their whole team was off. So that really worked well. And then, we even use things like our OKRs process to kind of check ourselves on like the volume of work. Like, are we really being reasonable about like, because a lot of times with those things, when there's a lot of projects going on, it's the same team that gets pulled into, a lot of different things. And so we kind of made it okay for people to say, we don't have capacity to like take on this many more things. And we use that process to try and be just really pragmatic about the amount of work. So those were a couple of things that have really helped. And then the last thing I'll mention, Amy mentioned this, the engagement surveys are so critical because that's our feedback mechanism and a way for people to tell us, how are we doing? How are you feeling? What do you need? And some of those programs I mentioned were a product of what came out in the engagement survey. So those are really valuable.
Oh, that feedback I'm like wishing I could take all notes while you're talking. Those are great thoughts. Paula, what's happening at VMware in this regard?
Yeah, so a lot of the same. I think it's a fantastic conversation. I think what we kind of try to focus on was what's realistic. We're in this new norm, and I think Amy said it earlier in terms of if we don't learn from this period, then it's a missed opportunity. So really trying to figure out, okay, where can we innovate and move forward? And within my organization, every quarter we give an innovation award, and we just gave it out last week to, a woman on the team who just built a whole new kind of way of looking at commissions, and it was on her goals. But she wasn't directly responsible for that, but she took it to the next level, and she created something that we probably wouldn't have thought of without the pandemic. So I think a lot of it is, how do we shift and move forward in a progressive way and think about doing things differently, not maintaining the past, because the past, coming out of this, we have to be better.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I hear people talk to when are we going to go back to normal, particularly regarding these issues and going back to the workplace in person and all, like, no, we have to move forward. We're going back to creating something new. And part of creating something new there, I think, is really going to have to involve how are we preparing our frontline managers at every level to know how to do this well, right? Because we all know the statistics that, like, people don't generally leave their organization or even their job function. They leave their manager, right? And so as leaders and as organizations, what are you guys doing to help your managers? We provide so much training in so many topics. How do you successfully recruit, retain, develop, and promote employees who are in the midst of a caregiving phase of their careers? And I always say it that way because every employee almost is going to be there at some point, and it is a phase. Could be a long one. Mine's very long. It's not like a static part of your working experience either. So I guess with that, just looking, like, Amy, what are you guys thinking of at Microsoft in terms of what you're already doing, or maybe ideas you're playing with about, like, how do we make sure our managers feel like they're not in the buffer zone between aggressive goals and employees who they value and see the stress of? Like, how do we make the managers feel empowered and successful, whether or not they're caregivers themselves?
Yeah, and such a great way you framed this, Heather, about, it isn't static. And so I think, so at Microsoft, we have about 20,000 managers. So I think we have really changed the construct of thinking of them as somebody we have to talk to because we need something done, to a group that's so critical for us to engage with. And really started by, how do we have conversations with them, listen to them, in fact, not berate our managers. We're pretty hard on our managers, honor that our managers have hard jobs. As many of you in tech understand, there's still such a big part of individual goals and contribution instilled within the manager's job. And so really trying to be empathetic to managers, and especially during these times where everything feels so uncertain. So I think we've tried to legitimize conversations, Heather, like flexibility is not a trade-off for business outcomes. It's just not. And so how do we start to have those conversations? This is also with all the underpinnings, as we all know, that are foundational about allyship and microaggressions and unconscious bias. So they're building empathy for all different diverse perspectives, but just also being very specific about what they could need at the moment. The same way that we've thought about the acute needs of our, our caregivers, our working moms, our working dads at that moment. How can we meet our managers with specific things that they need during these times? And some of the things that we came up with is how to have conversations about what are our team agreements now that everybody's at home. When some people come back and some people are, how do we work together as a team? How do you have a conversation about boundaries? How do you have a conversation about flexibility? So just actually putting some really quick team conversations together for our managers about how would you start this? How do you do, many of you guys have talked about keeping connections and employee connectedness and how exhausting it became. And so how do you learn how to do really quick connects? And then also democratizing the data, the employee listening data. We've really held that at the leadership and HR perspective for so long, but how do we share with managers? This is how employees feel when you help them prioritize. They actually have better work-life balance and better engagement. So we started to share, the data that will help nudge their behavior and make them feel supported.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. Erica, I'm wondering whether there are ideas that Amy just shared or things that are already happening at Confluent When you think of the field operations perspective, what feel like ways that are practical in the function that you lead to support managers in this way?
Yeah, I so agree with the philosophy that, of treating our managers from first line managers up, that they're an extension, of the executive team. They play such an important role as leaders in the company. And I've always felt that oftentimes those frontline leadership roles can be the hardest jobs in the company. Certainly in a sales organization, I think they can be really hard jobs, and it's often people in their first leadership role when they're playing those roles. And so the more we can do to pull the leaders in, and as Amy said, make them part of the conversation, I think that's really valuable. So start by modeling empathy to them. And I have also found that, great sort of inclusivity training, managing inclusively, those curriculums that are out there can go a really long way to teaching empathy, because it really is all about, to Joyce's point, listening. And so you're giving managers the listening skills, and how do I make sure that everyone on my team feels like they have a voice and that they're really heard? That's going to get at empathy. And so I think, just as a really practical recommendation, rolling out kind of managing inclusively type trainings gets us, a large part of the way there.
Absolutely.
But I think when managers feel like they're being taken care of, and they are heard by us, and it's acknowledged that they have a hard job, they'll then turn around, I think, with a little more empathy for their own teams. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and when team members see their managers being prepared in this way, being cared for really by the organization in this way, the engagement and the loyalty, the desire to be promoted and experience that, themselves, get their own manager's job, kicks in. Paula, I'm wondering, coming from the world of finance, do you see that there's different ways of supporting managers in your team, or kind of similar?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's the kind of HR policies that kind of are waterfall down throughout the organization, and they're wonderful tools and assets. I think what we're trying to do within finance is really try to bring up that layer, that next management layer, up into the conversation. So have them participate in extended staff meetings, let them know what the priorities are, what the story is, so that they can go and communicate that back down through the organization. So really trying to come at it from two ends. And then I think in finance as well, I mean, obviously we're the boring nerds. So, we've got to put our accountant hats on, but really, how do we then support the organization through budget? Whether that is like what we've all chatted about here, whether it's the benefits programs for, the different, mental health issues, whatever it might be, or those days off that are critical, how we build that in through the budgeting process. So support the entire organization, and then try to come at the managers from both ends.
That's great. Joyce, any closing thoughts on this question?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we talked a little bit about annual, sort of the syncs or discussions that people have. And I was talking to our head of HR, who's a woman, and she said, it's funny, you don't realize until you have to be so deliberate that we've taken so much of the personalization out of those conversations. We've made it so sterile to goals and development and so forth. And we're actually having to train managers, like how to talk to them at a personal level, sort of, be more empathetic and sort of get to know that person and what they're looking for. So I think it's a good thing, but it is a new thing for a lot of managers who've been trained to sort of look at this, matrix and see where your skills fit, right? So
yeah, totally. No, that makes tons of sense. I think the last topic that I want us to touch on, and we only have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to shift us a little bit into like brainstorming mode, like looking ahead, where is the opportunity in this particular area? So when we look at which employee groups are most affected by caregiving, whether that's for adults or kids, essentially, I have lots of stats I'd share with you if we had more time. But when it comes down to it, sort of the same populations that we often see ERGs created to support and develop, they are literally have higher rates of caregiving, spend more of their take-home salary on it, are more likely to be in the sandwich generation, are younger caregivers. These are exactly the employees that we're working hard to retain and develop. who are crashing into a caregiving wall exactly at the point in their career where they need the most support. So how do you see that your organizations, like maybe one quick thought from each of you, could address the intersectionality of caregiving and your diversity, equity, and inclusion goals for 2021? If there's something you're already doing, let's celebrate it. But if you're just brainstorming or saying like, we're not doing this, but somebody should, that's fair game too. And I'll leave it to you guys. Kick in if you have an idea you want to share.
I'm happy to jump in. So, and I'm really interested in terms of other ideas as well, because I do think it's kind of, somewhat uncharted waters. I mean, from my perspective, if it's not measured, then it doesn't mean anything. So just like we're measuring and focusing on D&I and, that we have different bonuses associated with moving it, and it works when you do that. I mean, we know people react to that type of environment. So trying to figure out what would be the right metrics and how to measure it, I think will be the first part. And then putting something behind that, to make it meaningful. And that could drive the organization then to open it up and just like consider this group and how to support them in a very meaningful way.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah, I would say, sorry.
Go ahead, Joyce.
I would say the thing that I would like to try is to be more deliberate about designing things so that it does accommodate that situation, right? So whether it is children or elderly parents or both, whatever caregiving situation, don't put them always in the position where they have to vocalize it and say, I need X, but try and think through that, have some options so that they can naturally slot in without feeling, because again, I do think it's going to take time for people to get over the mentality of this is not okay, or it's going to hurt my career. And
Sure.
It really shouldn't be the case.
No, in fact, only 50% of people who are family caregivers for adults tell their supervisors, 50%. Mm-hmm. And millennials are the least likely to be open with their managers. So there's like this gap for us to fill. Erica, do you have any thoughts on this kind of intersection of caregiving and DEI goals?
Yeah, I do think it's, uncharted territory to a degree, but in addition to the ideas that have been mentioned, I do think that, ERGs and community matter as one element. They don't solve problems, but they matter as a place for people to go. We've talked about launching a caregivers ERG as a place for, for people to come together. I've had prior experience with kind of a new mothers club, again, is just a place for, people to find community. But I really appreciate Joyce's comment about not forcing everyone who has sort of that extra need for flexibility to self-select and call it out, but putting programs out there and then inviting people in. And, the last thing I would say is that I'm just a big believer in mentorship and sponsorship programs for your high potential talent, especially your high potential diverse talent, so that each of those individuals has somebody who's looking after them saying, we want to get you promoted because you've got the skills. Let's talk about how we're going to make that work. And so I just think that sponsorship and advocacy is really important as well.
Great. Thank you. We're just about out of time, but Amy, do you have any thoughts that haven't been kind of flagged here, things you're thinking about at Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, these women have said some amazing things that I could say plus one to many. There's just a couple, and I could learn a lot. We have a lot of opportunity here. Role modeling, number one, with storytelling is talking about myself as a caregiver. Our CEO is now talking about him as a caregiver, and what that looks like, what managers meant. So I think that's super powerful to take, leaders through. And then to Erica's point, we've taken our parents' ERG and made it into a family's ERG, and then talked about our, families are caregivers. It means of any kind. And so really shattering, trying to continue the conversation to shatter the idea that you leave your personal life when you come to work, because we just know that that's not true. So, but lots to learn and lots of ideas that I could get from these women for sure.
Sounds great. Well, I could talk with you guys about this forever, but I want to make sure we leave time for an audience question or two. Sherry, what are you seeing in the chat as questions from the audience?
Well, to echo your sentiment, great conversation. And yes, do have a couple of questions from the audience. I think this first question, would love to hear from everybody if possible. What is your vision as we move into a hybrid workplace? How can we continue to lead with empathy when there will be different interactions with some virtual and others in person? Maybe Joyce, can you kick us off?
Sure. I think the virtual world has let everyone sort of, we talked about the democratization opportunity, right? Like we're all equal. I am trying to be very deliberate about what meetings are going to stay that way, even if that means you're going to participate from your office with 5 other people in the office with 2 remote, because it's so hard to be the guy or girl on the wall with a room full of people at a table and you're like, you know. So that's the one thing that I really want to get rid of and do better.
Yeah, I second that.
Go ahead, Erica.
I hope we can be not just jump back into commuting and traveling and, all, meetings of a certain kind, executive staff or your team meeting have to be in person. I think we've proven that virtual is so powerful. And I do think it's going to take a little bit of like an agreement with different teams of, okay, how are we going to run this? Or what's our expectation in terms of, how often people need to be in the office or out in front of customers. I think a lot about how we've proven to customers that we can be really effective not having to show up in their office all the time, and so being empathetic to our customers of like, before we dive back in and assume that they just want to see us, walking the halls again, I think we have to think about that. So I think we need to be really intentional about how we go back or move forward. Excuse me,
Erica, go forward. You said it right, is how do we not let muscle memory sort of take over from here, especially since we're also eager for some dimension in life. I know for one, I'd like to go out to eat, but I don't need to go back into the office Monday through Friday from 7 to 6 either. It's kind of the same, Sherry, as Heather or Joyce's point, which was we are trying to deconstruct the meeting experience. I mean, we're a company of meetings, and so how do we look at the dimensions of the physical structure of the meeting? So the rooms are set up for people. So how do we really actually change what a room feels like? You guys know the cameras are in different places, and so sometimes, sometimes the poor person on the video call is only seeing everybody's back. And so we're looking at the structure of the rooms. We're looking at the technology. So should everybody log into whatever they're using? I use Teams. And even if you're there in person, and then the inclusion of the people and what do the humans do that are in the room. So we're trying to deconstruct the simplest of things. It's not actually that simple to make hybrid really inclusive, but we got a long ways to go.
Yeah, I think something we've started practicing is even within, a virtual meeting is having some breakout sessions whereby the teams are collaborating virtually as a subset of something as a bigger meeting. And it's been really interesting because those like little subset groups come back and they're like, we needed more time because we spent 15 minutes just catching up with everybody because, we haven't spent time with 2 or 3 people. It's always been like 20 people on a meeting or whatever. So I think that's been kind of a starting point for us in terms of you can have these smaller virtual groups collaborate and come back to something bigger. And I think at VMware, what we're focusing on as well is our offices becoming more the collaboration hubs, so that when you do need to collaborate on something, you're bringing all those people to collaborate. And like we've all learned, like we don't need to be here for every meeting, and we probably have way too many meetings. So I think that, I think you said it, Amy, in terms of how do you deconstruct the meeting and make it more purposeful. I think that has to be a strong focus too. So I think it's exciting. I don't want to go back to the commute 5 days a week and seeing my kids for 5 seconds. So we've got to find the right blend here. I think it's essential.
Love that. That is definitely how I'm feeling myself as a working mom with little kids here as well, but certainly missing time with my customers and being able to have the opportunity to have that interaction. I think we've got time for probably one last question from the audience. I'm not convinced the goals were adjusted to accommodate for how long the pandemic is lasting. There's even more work and fewer people, and the work is falling onto those who are earlier in career who don't have children or parents to care for. What can people who aren't caregiving do to maintain balance while having to pick up extra work? Maybe we can do one final around the horn as we wrap up.
I would say caregiver yourself. So just because you're not taking care of somebody else doesn't mean that you can't put yourself as a priority. So I encourage those that do not have a caregiving role to do that for themselves.
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on, Joyce. I agree completely. You know, everybody has to find that for themselves. And you know, whether you're caregiving or doing something else, you need that break from work. And I think if you're always on, you're always working, you're going to be getting more of the work. So you have to set up those boundaries as well and have those conversations with your management.
Yeah, +1. I think it's okay to say, I know it's easier to say, oh, I can't do that because, you know, I have to take care of my children or something, but just drop the because. Like, no, I have a personal commitment, you know, and you have working hours, and that's okay. That should be sufficient in my book.
Yeah, a +1, Erica. And you know, I'll be honest. I struggled with finding empathy sometimes in these really hard times for that conversation, but in an effort to be an ally to all, I think that's right. I think we have to listen to folks that don't have caregiving responsibilities and make sure we're giving them the same tools for communicating about prioritization, having conversations with leadership that we're giving everyone else. So, but I do love caregiving for yourself, Joyce. That's a good one. We all need it.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Back to you, Heather.
Well, we're just going to close out the panel and just say thank you. You guys, what a vibrant conversation. And I have to say, without the ability to kind of all meet together before we're on a stage together as a panel, I love what happens when you put 4 really smart, really empathetic women in a virtual room together and see what happens. So thank you all for showing up in such an authentic way with us today. I want to thank everybody who's been with us throughout, and just let you know the panelists, I think, have given us lots of specific ideas. I'm sure they'd be open to your questions if you have any afterwards for specific follow-up. I know I'm happy to talk with any of you about how do you start this kind of conversation in your own workplace and what are the tools you can use for that. It's just find me at workableconcept.com. And just a thanks to Sherry and Shaylee for bringing us all together today. So Sherry and Shaylee, back to you for the closeout.
Great. Thanks, Heather. What an incredible afternoon. Reflect, recalibrate, and reset. Keep replaying in my mind. And hopefully, like many of you, I'm leaving today's event energized and inspired to take bolder actions as a leader. And as a caregiver, thank you for paying it forward with an authentic discussion, demonstrating empathy and action across organizations and the leaders who were represented here today.
We're always trying to improve by building on each year's event. So please take a few minutes to fill out the survey that's posted in the meeting chat and learn about opportunities as well to continue the conversation with our leaders. We're looking forward to hearing from you to improve and incorporate your feedback. Thanks for being with us here today and sharing your time and insights. We sincerely hope it was valuable for you as much as it was for us to learn from a great group of amazing leaders who will be helping us build a stronger purpose, plan, and community.
And we do want to keep this community engaged between our programs. So in the survey, please let us know if you'd like to continue the discussion by participating in an upcoming virtual book club where we'll be reading Embrace Your Edge, hosted by women at Microsoft. So it'll just take a few minutes. So please share your feedback to receive those instructions on how to get your free copy of Hang's book. But we do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you again to Katie, to Hang, to all of our panelists, to Heather. Thank you. And a special thanks to women at Microsoft and all of our volunteers who helped make today special. We look forward to being back in person with all of you in December, but we are super excited to continue the dialogue over the coming months. So stay well and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you all.